This morning, I'm starting a brand new series. This series is going to span probably 5 weeks. We're going to be talking about the life of Jacob, the Jacob who became Israel. And this is all about finding ourselves. Now, I know that it seems like a weird title for a series about finding ourselves. The series title is End of Me. And I'm just hoping that what we can do throughout this series is journey in a process of self-discovery. If we're going to find ourselves, if we're going to find out who we truly are, if we're going to come to the place of knowing what is this, who am I? We have to shed the things that we've heard from others, the things that we believe about ourselves, the things that we assume that we should be. I mean, this extends so much farther than just things that we've heard expressed to us over the years. It is even a part or a common practice of the church at times, at large, that some people have been pushed into these places, and it has been assumed that in order to be a Christian, you have to do certain things. You have to be a certain way. You have to look a certain way, or behave a certain way, or act a certain way. And I know that there are certain things in the Bible that are non-negotiables, things that are definitely who you are. I'm not saying that because we're free by grace that we can do whatever we want to. That's not what I'm suggesting. But what I am saying is that we should allow ourselves to be individual. We should allow ourselves to experience the fullness of who God is and Christ is in our individuality, in our own life expressions. And the struggle is about who we are and who we want to appear to be. Who we are and who we would want others to perceive us to be. Who we are and who we believe we are supposed to be. Now, God in His wonder, God in His amazing creativity, formed each and every one of us specifically and uniquely. He made us, He shaped us, He formed us, so much so that each one of our fingerprints are individual. There is no fingerprint alike. And because of that creativity, He made you and He threw away the mold. He made you and He got rid of the mold so that there would be no one else like you. And He wants you to be you, but we are living in a time right now where we are overwhelmed by who we think we're supposed to be. Who we suppose we're supposed to be. I read this same statistic in a sermon series that I did last year titled Conquering the Chatterbox. We were talking all about the internal mechanism inside of our brain that just continues to talk and talk and talk. And startling is that we have 60,000 thoughts a day. And 95% of those, roughly 57,000 of those 60,000 thoughts that we have every day are about yesterday, about things that we just experienced the day before. And 45,000 of those 60,000 thoughts are actually negative thoughts. Negative thoughts about ourselves, about who we perceive to be. You know, it's crazy to me. And some of you guys might not even know what this is, but I found out the other day in doing some statistical analysis on people that are focused on self, or focused on themselves, that over 1 million selfies are taken every day. Do you guys, anybody know what a selfie is? Who here in the last week has taken a selfie? Okay, wow. Not very many of you. Who in this room have no idea what a selfie is? Okay. Thanks for being real, guys. This is what you do. A selfie is when you take a picture of yourself with your device or your phone or whatever, and you post it online. Now, if you guys notice, it's crazy to me, but the more elaborate the technology has got, the more people have been able to hide flaws or perceived flaws. They got all these different filters, all these different edits, all these different things. Like, I know that for my own phone, like, you can even download an app that erases blemishes on your face. Like, you can erase a pimple on a selfie if you want to. Now, this is going to sound ludicrous to you, but maybe it won't. How many of you guys have ever met someone who's narcissistic? Okay, now, let me ask you a bigger question. How many would be honest this morning and say that you are in some ways or another, at least to some extent, narcissistic? All right? I believe that we, because of our nature, because of how we are born, I mean, you have children and you'll get it. Each one of us, to an extent, are a tad bit narcissistic. We're focused on ourselves. We're focused on us. We're focused on me. And that's really what I want to focus on this morning as we start this series. Now, we're going to be walking throughout Jacob's life. We're going to be talking about his experiences and what he went through. We're going to talk about his reconciliation with Esau. We're going to talk about his new name a little bit this morning. There's so much that's going to be going on in this 5-week series. I want to encourage you guys to do your best to commit to be here for it. And if you can't, catch it online. Try your hardest, because this is one of those things that it's going to build on each week, and there's going to be greater opportunity with each week for you to get a little bit farther into discovering who you really are, discovering the truth about you, discovering the truth about me. And here's the crazy thing about discovering ourselves. Who do you think is at times the greatest obstacle to figuring out who me is? Me. And so through this series, we're going to talk about the end of me. Okay? It is when we come to the place of understanding our Creator and understanding who our Creator is and understanding how He made us that we can discover who we really are. You can't understand a painting fully. You ever, I mean, like, there are some paintings that you can understand. You can read them because they're landscapes and so on and so forth. But you ever seen something abstract and it doesn't make sense to you, but then you hear from the artist about what that painting means, and then suddenly it becomes clear? You can't expect to understand who you are fully until you understand what He created you to be, who He created you, how He formed you, how He shaped you, how He made you. Now, before you start freaking out and start thinking about all the doubts you have and all the insecurities you have, don't worry. We're in good company. If you take a look for just a moment at some of the prophets and the big names of the Old Testament, you will find really, really, really flawed people. We look at people like Peter, right? The church started with Peter. I mean, he was the first speaker on the day of Pentecost, stood up, shouted out the truth, but just days before, he was lying about who we knew, right? Paul was a murderer, right? Elijah was moody. Moses stuttered. He stuttered. God was telling him, I want you to go to Egypt to free my people. And Moses is just like, excuse after excuse after excuse, why he wouldn't be good enough, why he wasn't enough, why it didn't make sense for him to do that. Abraham was old. Remember, he had children in his old age. I mean, just the ludicrous idea of it. Just a big one. You guys have seen this probably online somewhere before, but just for the record, Lazarus was dead. I mean, like, it's one thing to have a flaw or something, but Lazarus, he was just dead. I mean, God can do anything with anyone. God can orchestrate amazing things. God can create incredible opportunities for people to become everything that He wants them to be. But we have got to come to recognize our issue, our problem, our trouble. We can't fool God with our disguises. We can easily lose sight of our true selves. when we start chasing the world, we start chasing things that we think should be, or who we think we should be, or who we perceive, or what we perceive about ourselves, we can so quickly lose sight of who God says we are. And so number one, the very real problem is that we are taught from an early age to live for me, to live for ourselves, to live for what we want. Now in Genesis 32, we hear a story, and this is a great part of the context of what I'm sharing this morning, and we'll get to Genesis 32 a little bit later, but in Genesis 32, we see a physical wrestling match between Jacob and a messenger of God, some believing the pre-incarnate Jesus. We're not absolutely positive who it is. All we know is that Jacob is battling for a blessing. He's fighting it out. He's not letting go. He's being relentless. He's not going to release this being until he receives his blessing. And if we look at Jacob's story, we are going to find a man who has been struggling and fighting and battling to get ahead his whole life, even from the womb. If you go back, we're going to be in Genesis 32 a little bit later, but if you go back to Genesis 25, there's Bibles in your seats. If you have an app, you can use that on your phone or device or whatever. But in Genesis 25, this is how the story starts. This is Jacob and Esau, all right? Mama gets pregnant with twins. And obviously she doesn't know she has twins. They didn't have sonograms and that kind of stuff then. I mean, this is the account of the family of Abraham, son of Isaac. Abraham became the father of Isaac, and Isaac was 40 years old when he married Rebekah, daughter of Bethuel, the Aramean, and Padam Aram, and the sister of Laban and Aramean. Wow, got through that. Isaac prayed to the Lord on behalf of his wife because she was childless. And the Lord answered his prayer, and his wife Rebekah became pregnant. Now, verse 22, this is where the battle begins. 22, the babies jostled each other within her, and she said, "Why is this happening to me? Why?" So she went to inquire of the Lord, and the Lord said to her, okay, she's pregnant. She's going to have babies, okay? She's not fully understanding. I mean, I know just from, not my own personal experience, but, being with, my wife who's had 4 children now, fully able to have 4 children now, that babies can get kind of mobile in there. You guys know that she's a little lady. It's a lot more noticeable. She just, she got pregnant and you could see feet pushing and legs pushing, and every once in a while, just like, baby just like, and the old belly shakes. It's kind of funny, but she's like, this woman is like freaking out. There's 2 children inside of her womb, and they're jostling, they're fighting, they're battling back and forth already. And she's like, God, what is going on? I don't understand. I'm very confused right now. We can find ourselves maybe, and this is just a side note, but we can find ourselves at moments where God has impregnated us with a vision or an idea or a plan, and we can feel like 2 different things are arguing with one another. Take your advice and go to God. Let him speak to you. And this is what he says. And let me make sense of it. He says, 2 nations are in your womb, and 2 peoples from within you will be separated. One people will be stronger than the other. The older will serve the younger. And when the time came for her to give birth, there were twin boys in her womb. And the first to come out was red, and his whole body was like a hairy garment. So they named him Esau. Believe it or not, Esau actually means red. And so like when Esau grows up, you find out throughout the lineage and heritage of this experience and how they both existed. Esau was like a man's man. He went and hunted. His dad enjoyed the game that he brought back. He was burly. He was born hairy. Come on now. He was like this man's man. And then Esau, all right? After this, the brother came out with his hand grasping Esau's heel. So he was named Jacob. Isaac was 60 years old when Rebekah gave birth to them. Wow. They lived a lot longer then, just so you know. A lot longer. And so, yeah, we're having a good time down there. And so what happens is these two boys are born. One of them becomes a man's man, and then Esau, you'll find out throughout the story, and I'm just kind of paraphrasing some stuff so that we can get to the thrust of what I want to say this morning, that Esau is kind of like a guy who sticks around at home or stays around at home with his mom. He lived among the tents, he stayed in the tents. Jacob didn't really go out and do things and didn't go out and hunt like his brother Esau and so on and so forth, okay? And you watch, we're going to do a whole message on trading in God's perfect future for you for a bowl of beans. But we watch as Jacob finagles out of Esau's birthright with a bowl of soup. You got to read the story. Read the story this week. Go to Genesis and read, 25 and on, because we're going to be just touching on all these different experiences throughout this story. But Jacob would spend the rest of his life wrestling for a title. Now, let me give you cultural context, okay? In that day, inheritance weren't split evenly amongst family members. The oldest son always got the bigger portion, the bigger piece of the pie. If you were the oldest, you received more. It was considered in that culture, in that time, that if you were the older, you received more, you got more, you were gifted with more. And so I am sure that throughout Jacob's life, even at birth, holding on to the heel of his brother Esau, wondered, if only I had been born 4 seconds earlier. If only I'd have been born first. I would have received the blessing. I would have received my father's greater inheritance, my father's blessing. And he works so, he gets so focused on wanting to receive what's not his and be who he is not, that he even manipulates and distorts the truth in order to gain his brother's birthright. His brother comes in hungry and famished from hunting, and he's like, I need some food, and you got some soup brewing. And Jacob's like, give me your birthright, and I'll give you some beans. I mean, just like one of the most ridiculous trades ever recorded in Scripture, in any kind of history. I mean, like, he's like, fine, and so they trade. And later on, Jacob manipulates the situation. He even puts on fur to appear to feel like his hairy brother. Because his dad wants to, they find out mom works out this whole thing and works with Jacob on this, which is just a mess in itself. But she's like, okay, he's about to give Esau the birthright, and Esau went to go hunt some fresh game, and so mom says to, Jacob, go out and get and some animals, we'll butcher them, and I'll prepare them, and then he's like, okay, now go receive your blessing, and he's like, he's going to know I'm not my brother, and so he put on actual animal skins in an attempt to receive this blessing, and he receives the blessing. His father prays over him. His father speaks to him. And then what happens later on in the story, what happens is when his brother Esau, remember the man's man, the hunter, the dude, he finds out that Jacob has stolen his birthright, and he says, I'm going to kill him. And Esau runs. Jacob, man, I keep messing up the names. Jacob runs. He evacuates the area. He received the blessing, but he didn't get to experience it. He received a blessing under a different name, a different title. He was yearning to be someone that he was not. He was yearning to be the firstborn, but he was not the firstborn. He fought for that. He wanted that. He was desperate for that. He wanted what was not his. And there are many people in our culture, many people in our world, we ourselves, who have been battling our whole lives trying to be someone that we're not. Me first is an attitude of our culture, and when we begin to live me first, we begin to fight and we begin to grasp at the heels of other things. We want more, we hope for more, we desire for more, we hunger for more. We it's like crazy to me. I imagine that, like names were important back in that day. It wasn't what was popular at the time. Names had significant meaning. And can you imagine, as you began to come of age, when you begin to understand more and more things that your parents tell you, oh, by the way, your name is Jacob, and it means to grasp at the heel. Jacob also means deceiver. Now, he's given this title, and he's like, I can imagine he doesn't want this title. He doesn't want this name. He wants what his brother has. He wants the best. He wants to receive the inheritance. He wants what his brother is going to experience. So he manipulates, and we'll get more into that story in the series later on, but he manipulates, and he cheats, and he lies to get this blessing. And Jacob is never able to enjoy it. I mean, look at marketing, look at social media, look at the actions of those around us as they hurt others to get ahead. And take a self-assessment for a minute. I mean, look at your own life for just a second and ask yourself honestly, have you decided to live me first in this culture? There is a conflict that exists inside of each one of us. Just as Jacob wrestled with his family, with God, and with himself to find himself, we wrestle in the conflict between who we are or who we think we're supposed to be. Now, Matthew 19:30 flips the script upside down. Jesus makes a statement that is profound that we have got to grab a hold of this morning. And it says, but many who are first will be last, and many who are last will be first. The first shall be last, and the last shall be first. He completely contradicts the system and completely messes it up. I never thought for an instance that my kids would cuddle so hard. It's like me first is such a influence from the day of our beginning that kids, I got 4 of them. And sometimes, man, you want a hug, you want to cuddle or whatever, and you're like, who wants to give me a hug? And then all of a sudden you're like, wait! Because all 4 of them are running at you to cuddle you first. I want a piece of dad right now. I mean, it's like, we live in such a me first, what I want, what I'm hoping to obtain, what I want to have, that it leaves others devastated and hurt. And Esau was the firstborn. He was the one who should have received the father's blessing and the inheritance. And Jacob, from day one, as he came out of the womb, is grasping at Esau's heel, grasping to get ahead, grabbing at whatever he can, manipulating, distorting, lying, cheating, in an attempt to be someone that he's clearly not. Now, this is the truth. Me first is miserable. You just ask anybody who's lived their whole life putting themselves in front of everybody else. I mean, it may feel like they have everything they want. It may look as though they're good and life is great and life is grand. I'm just happy. I'm happy. I got it all. Me first is miserable. If we live our whole life fighting for first, grasping at the heel of everyone else, trying to get ahead, we will be nothing but exhausted and miserable. Mark 8:36 says it this way: what good is it for someone to gain the whole world yet forfeit their soul? You ever met somebody grasping so hard at trying to get ahead, trying to be somebody they're not, trying to get to this place where they think they should be, the person they think that they should be, and you look at them and you think in your heart of hearts, that's not you. There's somebody else living in there. You're just trying to be something that you're not. people who put themselves first, when we live in a me-first society, when we live to put ourselves as the center of attention, the center of our focus, the center, when we're like, what matters most is me, it's exhausting. I mean, you can seek after the accolades of others, look for the praise, look to be glorified, look to be honored, look to be lifted high. Some people just live off of the attention of others, and you go from place to place just to find whatever, it's like a drug, to find whatever next moment you can to be elevated or to be praised. And it's miserable. I've come in contact with pastors before that have just gone from person to person to person looking to be, good job, pastor, great sermon, pastor, wonderful, you're leading a wonderful church, you're doing wonderful things, pastor. And they look for the adoration of their peers, and they find themselves miserable and alone because they are seeking, it's good. They're seeking for themselves what only God can give, what only God can offer. If we live me first in this life, we'll lose ourselves. That is an assured promise. You live for you. You go for you. You do for you. You get ahead for you. You grasp at the heels of others. You get jealous. You get envious. You want what you want. You hope for what you hope for. You want to get ahead. I assure you this. When you fight like that to just get what you want for you, you will end up in some pretty miserable places. In the process, you will lose yourself. You will lose who God designed you to be. You will lose who God created you to be. As crazy as it sounds, you've got to lose you to find you. I know this seems so contradictory. But we are living in a world right now that is self-centered or selfie-centered or whatever you want to call it. And they're searching for themselves. They're trying to find themselves. They're trying to come to an understanding or a perspective of who they really are. And they're pursuing and they're searching and they're yearning and they're wanting and they're desiring and they're doing everything in their own power to come to a conclusion, to find out, who am I? And they're forgetting that the only way for the piece of art to make sense is to know the artist. The only way for you and I to have clear understanding of who we are, the only way for me to know me is to know the one who shaped me. It's to know the one who formed me. To know the one who made me. It's never enough. C.S. Lewis said it this way. I love C.S. Lewis. He says, we don't actually take pride in having something in life. We take pride in having more of it than someone else. Isaac seems to favor Esau because he'd hunt game for him and he'd bring it home. And Rebekah favored Jacob because he tended to stay home and be with her. At this point, Jacob is 76 years old. Like for a while I thought that, maybe Rebekah kind of like manipulated the situation, because if you look at this whole story, and we'll look at this later on, but Rebekah helped Jacob lie to his father to receive the birthright. He worked at it. He helped them to receive this to receive this blessing from his father. And he's 76 years old. You would think that he would know better by now. And he ends up on the run. He evacuates. He hides. He leaves. All his life, grasping at the heels, grasping at what his brother had, finally got ahead. Finally manipulated, steal, cheated, did what he had to get in front, and then he ran. He didn't even experience the blessing he stole. It's not enough to be thin. I've got to be thinner. It's not enough to have. I've got to have more. It's not enough to be nice. All right? To look nice. I've got to look nicer. It's not enough to be rich. I've got to be richer. It's not enough to have things. I've got to have nicer things. And here's the truth. There's always going to be someone out there that's going to have an to your There's always going to be someone who's going to have nicer things than your nicer things. You will never be happy pursuing life that way. Never. Never, 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 never. I know what it feels like. If I can have this next piece of tech, if I can have this nice vehicle, if I can have this nice... I've seen parents go toe-to-toe to argue about whose kid is cuter, whose kid's dressed cuter, whose kid's got the best haircut, whose kid is getting better grades, who kid this and that. And they put their kid in the middle of their own battle to get ahead. Me first is miserable. Me first is miserable. In Genesis 27, we see kind of as the story unfolds, and I'm going to get to something very important here in a minute. In verse 17, or actually in verse 15, Rebecca and Esau are at this point plotting. And so they get some tasty food. In verse 17, then she handed her son Jacob the tasty food and the bread she had made, and he went to his father and said, my father. Yes, my son, he answered. Who is it? Now his father's probably blind or near blind at this point. And Jacob said to his father, I am Esau, your firstborn. I have done as you've told me. Please sit up and eat some of my game, that you may give me your blessing. And Isaac asked his son, how did you find it so quickly? He had just sent out his son Esau to go hunt for him, and he came back immediately. His mother, Rebekah, went to Jacob and said, quick. Esau left to go hunt. Go get some food and bring it back real quick so that we can deceive your father. And he said, the Lord your God gave me success, he replied. In verse 21, then Isaac said to Jacob, come near so I can touch you, my son, to know whether you really are my son Esau or not. Jacob went close to his father Isaac, who had touched him, and said, the voice is the voice of Jacob, but the hands are the hands of Esau. Remember, I told you he put animal skins on his body to conceal himself. He did not recognize him, for his hands were hairy like those of his brother Esau, so he proceeded to bless him. Are you really my son Esau? He asked. I am, he replied. Then he said, my son, bring me some of the game to eat so that I may eat and give you a blessing. And so it goes on. He gives him the blessing. And then he speaks this blessing over him. And in verse 31, actually verse 30, after Isaac had finished blessing him and Jacob had scarcely left his father's presence, his brother Esau came in from the hunt. And he too had prepared a tasty food and brought it to his father. And then he said to him, my father, please sit up and eat from of the game so that you may give me your blessing. And his father Isaac asked him, who are you? I am your son, he answered, your firstborn Esau. Isaac trembled violently and said, who was it then that hunted game and brought it to me? I ate it just as you came, and I blessed him. And indeed, he will be blessed. When Esau heard his father's words, he burst out with a loud and bitter cry and said to his father, bless me, me too, father. But he said, your brother came deceitfully and took your blessing. And Esau said, isn't he rightly named Jacob, right? Deceiver. This is the second time he has taken advantage of me. He took my birthright, and now he's taken my blessing. And then he asked, haven't you reserved any blessing for me? Isaac answered Esau, I have made him lord over you, and have made all his relatives, his servants, and I have sustained him with grain and new wine. So what can I possibly do for you? Remember, the older son received more of the birthright than the younger son. And then later on it says this. Esau held a grudge. This is in verse 41, just passing through here. Esau held a grudge against Jacob because of the blessing his father had given him. And he said to himself, the days of mourning for my father are near. Then I will kill my brother Jacob. Jacob's mom ultimately goes and tells him that his brother is plotting to kill him. And that's when Jacob flees. He runs. Now, 20 years had gone by. Jacob's in the wilderness. Fast forward, we're going to get to this so important of a point, the true me. Jacob has wandered in the desert. He's left. He's made his own land. He's created his own place. He's blessed beyond blessed. And God speaks to him and says, it's time to go home. Now, he's been gone for 20 years, 21 years. He's ran away. He's not been anywhere near his brother or the family for fear of his life. And he's on his way back, and he has this wicked, strange dream, and then he gets in this wrestling battle with this man, this individual, this messenger of God. And you stay tuned for the series, because I'm telling you, there is some beautiful and incredible reconciliation that takes place between Jacob and Esau. And there are beautiful things that can be reconciled in you when you can reconcile with yourself. There's so much that can be reconciled. But he begins to make this journey back home. All his life he's been grabbing at something. But this time something grabs him. All his life he's been grabbing at something. This battle that happens with this messenger of God. All his life, Jacob has been grabbing and grasping at the heels of others, trying to get ahead. And this time something grabs him. This time something takes hold of him. This time something grabs him. In Genesis 32, that night Jacob got up and took his 2 wives, another sermon, another time, and the 2 female servants and his 11 sons, and crossed the ford of the Jabbok. And after he had sent them across the stream, he sent over all his possessions. So Jacob was left alone, and a man wrestled with him till daybreak. And when the man saw that he could not overpower him, he touched the socket of Jacob's hip, so that his hip was wrenched as he wrestled with the man. Then the man said, "Let me go, for it is daybreak." But Jacob replied, "I will not let you go unless you bless me." And the man asked him, "What is your name?" And Jacob, he answered. This is what happens. Jacob, do you think the messenger knew who Jacob was? Absolutely. He's not asking Jacob's name for his own sake. He's asking Jacob's name to alert Jacob of where he's at and what's happening in this moment. When he says, "What is your name?" Jacob isn't just saying Jacob. He's saying Jacob with all the baggage, with all the things that he tried, with all the grasping, with living under the title deceiver, with living under the title the one who grasps at the heel. And this is what he says. Then the man said, "Your name will no longer be Jacob, but Israel, because you have struggled with God and with humans and have overcome." Jacob said, "Please tell me your name." But he replied, "Why do you ask my name?" And then he blessed them there. He blessed them there. What does Israel mean? Triumphant with God. The man who had grasped his whole life. The man who was born holding the heel of his brother. The man who was titled, grasping at the heel, or titled deceiver, would now be given a new title, would now be given a new name. You see, this wrestling match was about himself. This wrestling match would cause him to come to the end of himself. He had grabbed at things that were not his. He had fought to find a blessing that didn't belong to him because God had a blessing for him that was something else, that was something different. That was not what his brother Esau had. That was not what was for his brother Esau. And his whole life, he wandered. His whole life, he fought for this. His whole life, he wanted something different. His whole life. I would think that a man who had discovered himself, who had come to a conclusion of, I'm going to find me, I'm going to find out who I really am, I am going to allow this moment to define me, is a man who finds a messenger with God and is relentless about letting go. Refuses. I mean, he touched the socket of his hip. He's hobbling around, limping around. By this point, he's probably 97 years old. And he's still holding on. I'm not letting go until I get my blessing. I'm not letting go until it's defined at who I am. I'm not letting go until revelation comes. And for once and all, no longer am I going to grasp at the heels. I'm going to hold on to this until blessing comes, until the answer comes, until who God says I am. And at that moment, he's given a new name. Who he really is. Who is he? He's Israel now. He is triumphant with God. That's his answer. He's finally ready to take off Esau's clothes and be who he is. He's finally ready to come clear and come out with his battles, with his struggles, with his issues, with his trouble. It's time for him to be honest about who he is. And say, okay, I've struggled. I wanted to be someone else. I didn't know who I was. I wanted to be someone else so bad that I would use my mother to lie to my father to receive a blessing that didn't belong to me, only to fear for my life and to run off. And for 20 years, he created, and the Bible says he was prosperous. For that 20 years, blessing came, and he received blessing. He experienced the blessings of God. And God says, go back. And it's at this point that he wrestles with a messenger from God, that he discovers himself. When he comes to the end of himself, people in our world are pretending to be people they are not. I walk into the elementary and middle school and I see these middle school girls dressing the way that they dress sometimes. And I look at the insecurity and I see someone who is so beautiful trying to be someone they're not just to get attention. I see these guys walking around tough, I was talking to somebody just the other day that I bumped into just the other day that, when as a young man in high school, sometimes you come to this place of like kind of a rite of passage or whatever, where you feel like you got to finally, man up and show them who you are. See all these guys acting like they're tough, wanting to be tough, not wanting to show emotions, not wanting to be real about who they are personally, to try to be someone they're not because they're afraid of what they're going to receive from others. The laughter and the insecurity is so strong. Insecurity is so strong. We're living in a culture where people have lost themselves in a pursuit of trying to find themselves. We need to learn from this story. Jacob messed up. He thought he found himself when he deceived his dad, but he didn't. He was wearing someone else's skin, quite literally. He had put on a mask. He had faked it. He put on a facade. He pretended to be his brother so that he could receive a blessing. How many of us in this room and how many people do we know are pretending to be somebody that we're not, hoping that that's where the blessing comes? I got news for you. God cannot bless who you pretend to be. You've got to be you. You've got to be the real you. He doesn't call you what you did or who you were. You know that He calls you His beloved? And we see Jacob begin to fight. Okay, this is my stand. This is my moment. This is my statement. I am going to come to the reality of who I am, and I'm going to wrestle with this until I come to that place of discovery. And it was at that moment that he received his name, Israel. He received triumphant with God. It was at the point that he came to the end of himself. Now, just to shoot a little bit ahead, and then we're going to end this message. Exodus 3. Moses is speaking with God at this burning bush moment. God sharing with him his plan. And Moses, in verse 13, Moses says, "Suppose I go to the Israelites and say to them, 'The God of your father has sent me to you.' And they ask me, 'What is his name?' Then you should tell them, 'God said to Moses, I am who I am.'" Okay, we established that. "I am has sent you to me. God also said this." This is so important. "Say to the Israelites, 'The Lord, the God of your father, the God of Abraham, the God of Isaac, and the God of Jacob.'" Wait a minute. Why didn't he say Israel? Now, this is something that really just kind of settled in for a minute. Why didn't he say Israel? Why didn't he say the God of Israel instead of the God of Jacob? You know, and I may be reaching a little bit this morning, but I think that he's saying that because he wants Moses to know that, yeah, his new name was Israel, but he fought as Jacob. That God takes us as we are. That God takes us as this person we think we are. That life can be a struggle. That sometimes life can be messy. That sometimes we can have our moments. We can have our wrestling match. And we can come to that place of discovery with who God has defined us to be. And when we come to that conclusion, when God gives us that title, whatever that title is, we still combat with the person we were. We still combat with the affections of putting ourselves first. We still combat with trying to be somebody we're not. We still fight and battle that. And God is saying there that I take you, I welcome you. I'm the God of Jacob as well. The God that battled, the God that struggled with him, the God that helped him discover who he was and who he is. Triumphant with God. You guys with me? You guys tracking here? Okay. Jacob struggled his whole life trying to define himself. Struggled his whole life with a title he had been given at birth. Some of you have grown up in families, you've been given a title from day one. Someone told you who you were before you even know who you were. And you fought that, and you battled that, and you're still trying to figure out. I have met people in their old age, people who are on their deathbed, who still don't know who they are. And as contrary as it would appear to what is normal, to find you, you've got to let go of you. And let God speak. Jacob wasn't Esau. He wasn't. You're not those other people that you're trying to be. Stop getting so wrapped around being super spiritual and coming to church and be like, I wish I was like them, or looking at different statuses online and lining up your whole life to someone else's highlight reel. Lining up your whole life to someone else's perfect existence. I'm telling you guys, God wants to tell you who you are. Let him. Let him. Just this last question that I want to ask you guys at the very end there. Go ahead and skip to the last slide, John. Who have you been pretending to be? And what immediate action must you take to be freed from that? And what does that freedom, what does freedom from that look like to you? And what decision are you going to make to be free? What are you going to do today? What are you going to do today? What moment is going to happen and unfold right now? Father, we thank you for this morning. We thank you for truth. We thank you for the word, God. I thank you for the beautiful reality of what you had to say today. God, I pray right now that through all of these different details, kind of grabbing and pulling them together, Father, that we would come to some very real conclusions about who you say we are, that we would not get lost in a world that tries to define us by our external situation or what we have or have not. But God, that we would stop trying to be others and that we would learn to be ourselves, that we would wrestle with you, God, that you would allow us to realize that we can wrestle with you and that we would come to a place of self-discovery. God, help us. And be with us throughout this series, God, as this just kind of introduces this. That this week, God, that we would shed the skin of whatever else we're trying to be, that we would shed the mask, that we would shed the disguise. And as we wrestle with you, God, that we would find our true name, our true identity. It's in Jesus Christ's name we pray. Amen.